8:30 even.
Hi, I'm Jim Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. We're in the lead up to the Iowa caucuses, and the candidates and their campaigns are generating quite a bit of interest in a lot around the world. According to rankings released by Facebook, the U.S. presidential election was the #1 most talked about topic on Facebook this year. Joining me with an analysis of the latest from the campaigns and what's going on in the politics of the country is the host of the nationally syndicated radio show, The Bill Press Show, former co-host of MSNBC's Buchanan and Press, and CNN's Crossfire and The Spin Room, and the author of 6 books, including one that we'll talk about a little bit, The Obama Hate Machine. We had you on the show once before to talk about the book, and I want to talk a little about it tonight. We'll get into that in just a minute. What I first want to start with...
Good to see you, Jim.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
Thanks. What I first want to start with, though, is the polls. They're kind of all over the place when you look at it. I'm going to put 2 up that came out just back to back, one day and then the next day.
Okay.
First is one that shows Donald Trump at 27. This is the NBC one. 22 for Cruz, Marco Rubio 15, and Ben Carson at 11. That got a huge amount of play with people saying Cruz is surging and Trump, although up, is failing. Then one comes out the very next day, and it's the Washington Post one that shows Cruz up for sure, but Trump more than doubling his numbers, and everybody down in the low teens. Everybody else that counts. What do we make of this? Do we have a situation where, as the establishment hopes, Trump fades, or are the numbers here indicative of the fact that Trump is just not going away?
I want to add another poll. Monmouth University poll showed Trump at 41 and Cruz among nationwide likely Republicans, and Cruz at 14, number 2 at 14, and then Marco Rubio down around 8 and Jeb down around 5. First of all, I don't think any. If the pollsters are going to get angry at me, I don't think any of these polls today really mean anything. To me, all we conclude, I think, is the situation is situation is very fluid nationwide, and it's fluid in Iowa among the Republicans for sure, and that Trump is very strong and he's not going away. And anybody who thought, like I did, he wasn't going to really file, or he wasn't going to last through the summer, or he wouldn't make it to Iowa. He is
Or after
there.
his Megyn Kelly comments, he'd fade. Or after his Muslim comments. I mean, after each debate, they said, uh-oh, he did it this time, and his numbers get stronger.
And after everything outrageous he says, oh, that's it. That I think we know right now there is nothing he could say that's going to drive him down. But he's consistently up, and I think he's there at least through Iowa and through New Hampshire. And the Republican Party had better face the fact that it looks like they've got a Hobson's choice between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz.
Well, here's the issue, too, is when I look at all the polls, this one, the one previous, no matter where the numbers are, 60% of the Republican candidates, of the vote goes to candidates who are anti-establishment.
Yes.
Which makes it difficult for the establishment to criticize them, because that only reinforces the Ted Cruz message, they hate me, or the Donald Trump message, they hate me, or the Ben Carson message, that they hate me. So the Marco Rubio, Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, sort of more establishment candidates don't really seem to have a chance, given the fact that the establishment wants them, but 60% of the voters don't want them.
You know, in every previous, we've seen this scenario in the last 2 or 3 Republican presidential primaries, where there have been, let's just take the last time, look at all the outsiders, and they all had their day. Michelle Bachmann, Rick Santorum, Herman Cain, I forget who else was there, right? But in the end, they all settled on Mitt Romney. He was the establishment candidate. Everybody thought it would happen this year too, and that Jeb would be the one. It looks like this year the establishment candidate is not going to make it. Neither Jeb, nor Marco Rubio, nor Chris Christie. We have a lot of time, that could change. But right now, the outsiders are winning the day, as you point out. One other thing I think, E.J. Dionne in the Washington Post yesterday, I thought made a very, very important point. We focus on this, and we attach a lot of meaning to this. One other thing that we ought to remember about these polls is we're talking about a likely electorate in the Republican primary that is a very small percentage of the American electorate. In fact, E.J. Dionne did the math, and if you take Trump's 38 or 41% and translate it into the percentage that it would get of the American electorate, it's 13%, which is exactly what George Wallace got when he was running as a racist. So there's that element of the party or the American electorate that maybe hasn't changed, but Trump is certainly speaking to it.
But the issue that intrigues me, 13% is a big number if you're running a national election. Donald Trump has said he wouldn't bolt, run independent if he were treated fairly. The question is what he believes is being treated fairly, what that means. And so as I ask folks in the Republican establishment, what do you do? And they say, well, we're loath to criticize him because we're going to need those votes. And two, if we do criticize him and he leaves, we lose those votes. What therefore how do they navigate this situation, and where do Trump voters go? I watch these rallies, and I see the kind of demographic that he's appealing to. I don't think that they go easily to an establishment candidate. What happens in this context if he doesn't run independent, or if he does run independent? Where do these voters go? They stay home, or they bolt?
Well, first of all, I would hope they stay home because I think they represent the ugliest face of America. But these rallies, you're right. I mean, they're like the Roman circus. You know, fights are breaking out. I just talked to a reporter today, McKay Cobbins from BuzzFeed, who was saying she'd never seen anything like the fights were breaking out all over the room, and people were just shouting out really obscenities at some of these protesters and everything, and Trump was just loving it all and encouraging it on. But I want to, to your direct question, here's my belief. I think the Republican Party, to the extent that there is a central Republican establishment, I think they're making a huge mistake, and I think they're committing mass suicide. That they think that they're going to be able to coddle Trump until the time that he drops out, loses enough primaries or whatever, that he's gone, or that they have a brokered convention. I think if they believe that, I think they're in denial. I believe what they have to do is, the only way to stop him is a stake through the heart. And what I've been saying is, they've got to, you know, it's disgusting that they say, oh, what he said about Muslims is really outrageous. I don't agree with that. But of course, I'll vote for him as a Republican nominee. That's where they're making a mistake. I think they've got to say, we will not support him if he's a nominee. We will not accept him as a nominee. We will not accept him at the convention as the likely nominee, and force him to run as a third-party candidate, which I don't think he will do, and I'll tell you why. He'd have to spend his own money. I think Donald Trump is faking them all, and they're all going along with it. He will not spend his own money.
Just one question on Trump, and then I want to get to something else on this. There is the brand, the Trump brand. Prince Al-Walid in Saudi Arabia broke with him. Khalid Al-Habtour, the guy who was building the Trump golf course, et cetera, in Dubai, broke with him. I'd be damned if I go to a Trump facility here. I'm maybe a small part of the demographic, but I wonder whether or not the Trump brand has been irreversibly damaged as a financial question. There is not just an ego thing here, but there's now a brand issue here that's part of the Trump financial empire. He was able to sell the brand. That's how he built his hotel. He didn't build the hotels, he just put a stamp on it. If people increasingly don't want that stamp, where does he go? What does he do?
Well, I don't think it's destroyed yet, but I think it's being destroyed. I think the potential there is that it would be totally destroyed. And I believe that probably more than anything else is what will convince Trump to get out of the race, because that is his bread and butter. He knows that. He built that brand up, as phony as it may be. And I mean, here in Washington, D.C., you know, the hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue, the master chefs there, 2 of them pulled out. He has sued them, they've countersued him. People, it's poison now, it's toxic. And I think when he sees that that's going to be, that his livelihood, if you will, of the Trump brand is going to crash, right? That he may say, okay, enough's enough.
Let's put an Iowa poll up, because that's where the first contests take place. And Iowa polls are really difficult to predict because, number one, who are you polling? Caucus goers can be anybody that show up that night. And Trump, they say, is bringing out new voters, and so we don't know how to measure them. But it does show Ted Cruz winning evangelicals, who are 40-something% of the Iowa vote, rather handsomely, and Carson fading fast. Let's just talk about the Iowa situation a little bit, because you've been there, I've been there. I mean, it's a fascinating part of the American political scene. What do you expect we're going to see in Iowa? What happens is that we go into a kind of a month hibernation during Christmas, New Year's and stuff, and so where the numbers are now, they pretty much get frozen. But there are always surprises in Iowa by the time you get down to February 1 when it's going to happen.
Right, and it's not long after Christmas when the caucuses occur. First of all, this is a Des Moines Register poll. 2 days later, a Quinnipiac University poll came out on Iowa voters, same thing, that showed Donald Trump at 28 and Ted Cruz at 27. Again, these polls are to a certain extent kind of all over the place. But you know, the reason polling in Iowa is so difficult, you just named it, because of the nature of the caucuses. What we don't know, this means nothing if there's not a ground operation in back of every one of those candidates. Donald Trump could have, I mean, Ted Cruz could have 31%. If he doesn't have people who are going to bang on doors, drive cars, and get people out to the caucuses. If he doesn't have people, these caucuses, you don't go in like the rest of us do in this country and walk in and vote and leave. 5 minutes, or maybe you have to stand in line a little bit. The caucuses, you've got to go and you spend the evening there, and you have to stand up, right? No private vote. You stand up for your candidate, and then you move into this candidate, and the candidate and the people get together. It's like hours long, and then what if there's a snowstorm?
Yeah.
The snowstorm, people will stay home.
There's a lot of bartering that goes on.
Inside the caucus, there's a lot of bartering.
If the Rand Paul, Chris Christie crowd don't get enough to make the threshold, then they start negotiating with the other candidates.
Exactly.
You have no idea how it comes out.
You've seen it happen. I've seen it happen. That's why these polls are, they're kind of fun to talk about. But again, it depends on the ground game. Now, I've heard that Ted Cruz is busing people in from Texas, and that he's got a very good ground game. If that's the case, you know, he could.
The numbers might be right.
I would doubt, frankly, that Donald Trump would, because I think he's all talk.
Let's take a look at a Trump quote about Muslims. I just want to, because I want to shift gears for a minute to that issue. He said, I think there can be profiling. You have people who have to be tracked. If they're Muslims, they're Muslims. I mean, a famous Trump grammar here. I mean, it takes, it's difficult to decipher sometimes, but you get the meaning of it. The issue is that the debate in the party started off anti-immigrant, meaning Hispanic, and now it's shifted to anti-immigrant, meaning Syrians and then Muslims. It's had an impact on the polls, but the polls have also driven it, because that's where the Republican electorate is. I want to put 4 polls up that we've just done and look at each one separately, if we could. The first is rating toward Muslims, favorable, unfavorable. Overall, 33% favorable and 37% unfavorable. Look at the split with the GOP and Democrat. Democrats 44-28 and Republicans 26 favorable, 53 unfavorable. The numbers remind me of gay marriage 15 years ago between Democrats and Republicans. I mean, they're almost mirror reflections of each other. And now let's look at the next one. This is on the question of whether, if a Muslim were in government, do you think that they could carry out their job, or would they have their religion influence them? Look at the difference between the Democratic numbers and the Republican numbers. And when you get to the Trump numbers and the Cruz numbers, 75% say that they wouldn't trust a Muslim American in the job because they couldn't trust them. That was the argument that was being made by Ben Carson.
I was just going to say, it's not just Trump and Cruz, it's also
it's
Ben
the
Carson,
entire cast of characters. It's actually the same numbers for Rubio, too. Let's go to the next one. Best approach on Syrian refugees. Again, a huge partisan split with don't let any in among Republicans, almost 60%, with 16% saying you can do the president's 16. And among Democrats, it's 44% let him in, and 27% they're not willing to accept them. But 12% of Republicans say only let in Christians. And then the last one, which is I think the one that I really want to talk to you about, it's Obama's faith. is he a Christian or is he a Muslim? Among Democrats, 62% Christian, 12% Muslim. That's high. 7% a person of no faith. Among Republicans, 49% say he's a Muslim and 19% a person of no faith. And among Trump supporters, it's 60% rather, who say he is a Muslim. You wrote a book a while back on the Obama hate machine. Part of me suspects that this has been building for years, this anti-Muslim thing. Yes, it's tied to terrorism, but it's also tied to the person of the president. And I want you to talk about that a little bit, because this has been building not just with the candidates, but it's been building with talk radio, it's been building with Fox Television, it's been building with a whole institution, creating a mindset.
Well, let me just start by saying, I guess in a sentence, what I discovered in researching the attacks against President Obama, then candidate Barack Obama, and going back and looking at 43 previous presidents, is that nobody, maybe since Abraham Lincoln, has had the kind of direct, personal, nonstop personal attacks on him than Barack Obama has, and it's continued in his presidency. And I don't have to remind you that one of the chief architects of that, if you will, is Donald Trump, who never accepted President Obama as a legitimate citizen. He was the ultimate birther. So I think there's a huge chunk of the electorate you see right here who, number one, has never accepted him as an American, as an American citizen, and never accepted the fact that he's a Christian, no matter how many years he spent in the Christian church and Christian faith, and still today. And they equate Muslim with un-American, enemy, friend of terrorists, or whatever, the very worst things you could imagine that a Muslim might be. And so it has been building, and it does reflect, and I think reflects more than that too. I think we're still in a post-September 11 kind of bubble, right? Where people think violence, terrorism, killing innocent civilians, Muslim. And yet, if you look, right, at Newtown, or if you look at Colorado Springs, or if you look at Charleston, whatever, if you look at Roseburg, Oregon, right, they weren't Muslims, right? I mean, the two were September 11, if you're in this country, September 11, and San Bernardino. And all those others in between. You didn't have this national paranoia and this national hatred of certain people just because they committed these acts.
I want to talk about that in a minute. But
it reflects, I think, the worst. I mean, I find myself ashamed to be an American when I see this stuff.
I want to talk about that in a minute, the comparison of the acts of terror by the perpetrator, but the impact it's having on the election is one that is concerning me now, because the rhetoric has gone over the top. And
right.
New York Times had a piece recently on young Muslims experiencing this in some ways worse than 9/11, because at least then you had George Bush saying don't do it, but
yeah.
There's no grown-up in the Republican establishment who's challenging this.
No, I was going to make that point earlier. Seeing these numbers makes me miss George W. Bush.
Yeah.
You know, we remember when he went to the mosque here in Washington, D.C., and he was very, right after September 11, was very quick to say that. There's nobody in this crowd today who will stand up and make that assertion. I mean, around the edges. You might say Jeb Bush, yeah, but then Jeb Bush says we should only allow Christians in. And then Ben Carson says he would not accept any Muslim as president of the United States because he couldn't trust his loyalty. I mean, it's not, we focus on Trump, it's not just Donald Trump, it's the whole gang of them. And he is the worst. The others don't have enough spine really to take him on, with the possible exception of John Kasich.
And so where does this leave us? A continuing deteriorating debate, or will there be is there someone like a Mitt Romney who, when they did that debate, as difficult as Romney could be on some issues, when they did that debate where they were saying, do you think a Muslim should take a loyalty oath? Mitt Romney was the one who said, no, I don't think that's appropriate. As a Mormon, he felt it, but we've got Mormons in this contest who don't seem to be gun shy on this question.
I don't see well, it could go one of two ways. If Trump ends up, and they don't stand up to him, and he gets a nomination, which is not impossible, I think the Republican Party is gone. If the Republican Party loses the House, they lose the House, they lose the Senate, they lose the White House, and they are, I mean, a viable party. I'm not even sure. Or somebody will stand up and say, "All right, enough is enough." Who is that in this crowd today? I don't see that leader in the crowd. Again, maybe John Kasich, but he hasn't caught on. Maybe the one who's more likely to be able to do that would be Chris Christie. I mean, he does
have that.
He's got that.
He stood up to them once before,
right,
when he was governor, and he appointed a Muslim judge.
Yeah,
and got that. But
and
the
he
question is,
he has
you
also
got
said
49% saying this. You've got negative attitudes among the electorate, which is why when I speak to folks in the establishment, they say, we're loath to take him on because we don't want to alienate that crowd. If they don't take them on, where does that crowd go? What do they do?
I don't know where some of them just drop out because they're there just for Trump. They may not even vote for Trump. They're just saying that they just love him. They go to his rallies, right? So I'm not too worried about that. I think if the Republican Party thinks that this is its future, right? They're making a huge mistake. That's not the United States of America.
And
that's
not the Republican Party.
That's not who we are, and that's not who the Republican Party is. So again, I think this is a moment of truth for them, and they're going to have to recognize the threat that Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. Let me tell you, somebody else who's not going to be the nominee, but the only one who, I'm sorry I forgot him, who's made sense on this is Lindsey Graham.
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham said, "Let him go. I don't want him in the Republican Party. Let him form a third party." And Lindsey Graham said, "I would rather lose with somebody else than try to win with Donald Trump." Why? Because if we lose with somebody else, at least the party still stands for something that you can be proud of.
Let me go to one question back to the polls. You've got now this Cruz-Trump matchup. It's going to get mean. And here's a quote. I just want to play a little soundbite of them starting off on each other. I think this is Trump.
Look, I don't think he's qualified to be president.
Why not?
Because I don't think he has the right temperament. I don't think he's got the right judgment.
What's wrong with this temperament?
Well, you look at the way he's dealt with the Senate, where he goes in there like frankly, like a little bit of a maniac. You're never going to get things done that way. You can't walk into the Senate and scream and call people liars and not be able to cajole and get along with people. He'll never get anything done, and that's the problem with Ted.
The issue here is that this is the pot calling the kettle black.
Oh,
but
boy.
It's true. I mean, Ted Cruz is not at all liked by the establishment because he has defined himself as the anti-establishment senator and did call the majority leader a liar. This is going to get ugly before it gets pretty.
Ted Cruz is the most unpopular member out of 535 members of the United States Congress, the most unpopular among Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah.
The Republicans hate Ted Cruz.
And he worked hard to get there.
Yeah. So it's already getting okay. I think Donald Trump has attacked everybody else on the stage. I have to tell you, I saw on CNN the other day a headline that said, "Trump calls press dishonest." And I thought, oh my God, he's attacking me now. I thought, he attacks everybody. But Ted Cruz has been playing it, I must say, very smart. He has refused to criticize Donald Trump publicly. Privately, he has said you have to question his judgment, apparently, to some donors. But look, these two, neither one of them is going to go gently into the night, right?
Let me just shift gears.
The question is, if the two of them knock each other out, who is there to pick up
It
the
could
pieces?
be a replay of the Howard Dean, Dick Gephardt, Iowa contest with John Kerry sneaking up behind.
So it could be Marco Rubio. It could be long shot Jeb Bush,
or Chris Christie in New Hampshire.
Maybe Chris Christie. Yeah.
Let's shift gears for a minute. You did mention the difference between the way that the San Bernardino terrorist attack played out and Colorado and Charleston. It intrigued me because the backlash against Muslims was real. But there was no backlash against anti-abortion activists after
no.
Colorado. There was no backlash against people with Confederate flags on their cars after Charleston. And yet, this sort of the well has been poisoned on attitudes towards Muslims, so that people, when a terrorist attack occurs, if it's not a Muslim, it's kind of okay. We'll deal with this one, and we don't get anywhere. Two questions for you. One is, the president spoke eloquently about not targeting Muslims, one, and two, about the fact that what they all have in common are mentally deranged people inspired by some ideology getting guns that nobody should have. Are we going to move anywhere on either one of those issues, especially on the gun debate and on the mental illness debate?
You know, at some point, the American people are just going to say enough is enough is enough. You know the numbers. 89 killed every day. I mean, I saw yesterday on the news that the federal government now has said we have to license drones. Okay, register. Everybody who has a drone has to register a drone. Okay, I'm not against that, but nobody has died because of a drone. I mean, so a drone ended up on the south lawn of the White House, and there are some planes that have had to divert maybe a little bit because of a drone. But 89 people killed with gun violence, victims of gun violence every day in this country, and we don't have to register your gun. I mean, it is just insane. And after every one of these, we say, "Is this it?" I think we all thought that Newtown, Connecticut, would be at when 21st graders mowed down in their classroom and their teacher. But it's going to happen. It's got to happen at some point. As President Obama said when he made his remarks, no other country on the planet has this problem, with gun violence. We're the only one because we refused to do anything about it. And I think, and the president got some criticism for this, I think was absolutely right. He linked violence, terrorism. I mean, I think what happened in Colorado Springs was an act of terrorism, right? Not many people called it that. But he linked that with the guns. You cannot separate the two. You cannot say, we're going to protect you from terrorism unless you do something about the easy access to weapons of war in the streets of America.
Shift gears one more time, an issue I know you've been thinking about and talking about, and that's Chicago. The police commissioner forced to resign. There's calls now for the mayor to resign. A videotape was withheld for a year showing yet another outrageous killing of a person in the streets. And when it came to light, finally, the mayor acted. Mayor knew about it all this time. There is the question here of police impunity. We've seen it time and again. We see it on our streets. I mean, when you, I was walking from the show back to my office, and a taxi cab turned the corner and a police was there and started pounding on the guy's hood in the harshest of ways. And I got into it and I said, why don't you just ask him politely to move over? And he started screaming at me. But there's that sense almost of an out of control police department with heavily armed guys to boot. What do we do about this? And first, Chicago. Should Rahm resign?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so. There is no way the mayor did not know what was going on.
He saw it a year. He said he saw it for a year and he withheld it.
No, he said he didn't see. He said he didn't see the video. I don't believe him.
Yeah.
The city did not pay that family. They did not sue, but the city paid $5 million to that family. They didn't pay that family $5 million because it was Christmas Day, right? He saw the video. He knew it was bad. He was running for re-election. I'm convinced he was, even if he didn't see it, it still happened on his watch. I'm convinced he did see it, and he said, you can't show this because this is going to blow up. I'll never get re-elected. I think he should resign for the good of the city of Chicago. But this is a problem, again, the president's talked a lot about it, that we saw in Ferguson, that we saw in North Charleston, that we saw in Staten Island, that we saw in Baltimore. I lived through the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles way back then. I mean, the police consider themselves above the law. There's no strict, just rules of the road, if you will, for most police departments. They can do anything they want, And they have been getting away with it. I think that is starting to change. And I give the Black Lives Matter movement a lot of credit
for raising the issue.
For raising the issue.
We're all out of time right now,
Whoa.
but it's an issue I'd like
Too
to
much
come
to
back and
talk
talk about. Thank you so much for joining us. For more information, you can follow us on Twitter at AAIUSA or check out our website, aaiusa.org. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week on Viewpoint. Thanks.